Now let's take a close look at the rubric and scoring notes for each row. Now that we've done a quick overview of the general use of the presentation or oral defense rubric, let's dig into row 1 of the rubric with examples from the 3 sample videos I asked you to review. Before I can move on any further, many of the rows of the rubric refer to the terms argument, conclusion, new understanding, or terms such as research question / project goal. I feel the need to define or explain these terms so that you can apply the rubric fairly when you score your students' work. Although it would be nice, it is not required that a student actually say, "And here is my research question, problem, or project goal," or "Here is my method, process, or approach." It's not important that they use those exact words. What's important is that you and the panelists can easily identify and not infer what the actual research question or method was for the presentation being given. A research question may be stated, sometimes by the student, as their research question or even as their research problem. And you might think a research problem is not the same thing as a research question. Well, it could be that the student's research question is embedded within a problem statement, which is a common strategy in academic research. So, stating something as a research question or problem is okay with respect to the rubric. Second, having a research project goal is equivalent to having a research question governing one's research. It's just stated a bit differently. Some students have the goal of designing a product or a process through their research and then studying how that product or process was received or worked in a particular context. Again, this isn't a research question, it's a research project goal, and if a student presents or states such, it gets the same points as stating a research question or problem. Okay, now on to the next set of terms. A method, process, or approach is the same thing. It's a designed or chosen series of steps or tasks to generate evidence, information, a product, or process which addresses an actual and focused research question or project goal. Many students will state an actual research method, process, or approach, and they should get credit for doing so. However, whether or not they actually implemented such a method and generated the evidence, information, product, or process to address their question or project goal, that is for another row of the rubric. Now, on to the terms argument, conclusion, and new understanding. We use them interchangeably in AP research. A conclusion, an argument, or new understanding resulting from the student's chosen research method, approach, or process is the same thing. The only thing that could be considered different here is an understanding versus a new understanding. I will add finer points about that when we go through the rows of the rubric that address such. As it pertains to the actual rubric, although it would be nice, a student does not have to come out and say verbatim, "This is my argument, my conclusion, or new understanding." What is important is that the audience can easily identify such from the actual presentation. This is not the same thing as inferring that a student has presented their conclusion, argument, or understanding. For example, if you cannot tell what the actual conclusion, argument, or new understanding is that resulted from the student's research, then they neither presented nor stated such using one of the 3 terms. So don't try to infer it. If it's not there, no matter what the form. Now, if a student says something like, "Through my evidence, I determined that XYZ," or something like, "As you can see, the results clearly point to DEF," this is the student presenting their conclusion, argument, or new understanding. And finally, if the student has a slide with a title such as conclusion, argument, new understanding, or even if they use the words verbatim, this is the student stating their conclusion, argument, or new understanding verbatim. We count the presenting and stating blocks the same. We are not trying to hold students to the letter of the law, just the spirit or intent. Okay, to save both you and me some time, I will, from here on out, use the term research question for both the question and project goal. I will use the term method to stand for the method, process, or approach, and I will use the word conclusion for the conclusion, argument, or new understanding. And I will do so unless there are some nuances involved. Good? All right, let's move on. Let's look at the verbs for each column and the conjunctions for each as we examine row 1 of the rubric. This may be the only row of all of the rubric where the verb is the same, states. So at least this is an easy row to score. What's different about each column is what the student actually states. For example, in the low column, the student must state one of 3 things, the research question, or the method, or the conclusion. But in order to move into the medium column, the student must state the research question and either the method or the conclusion. And in order for the presentation to cross over into the high column, and most presentations do. The student must state their research question, project goal, method, approach process, and argument conclusion or new understanding. So, state is the verb for all three levels. But what about the conjunctions? Again, to move from low to medium, the student must state the research question and the method or conclusion. And to move from medium to high, the student must state the research question, method, and final conclusion. And to be very clear, we're not grading the quality of such in this row of the rubric. We're just trying to find out what their actual research project was about, what they did to address it, and what they came out with as a result of their inquiry process. End of list. Row 1 is about research design, as I stated before. We just want to know what the research was about, the method used to address such, and the conclusion that resulted. This is probably the easiest row to grade and the easiest points for students to get on the board. All three samples that I provide have students reaching the highest column and therefore receiving 3 points. The only difference between these three samples is the timestamp by which the evidence for this row of the rubric is demonstrated. For example, in the alcohol abuse and commercials sample, the research question is stated around the 30-second mark, where the student was looking for the correlation between the amount of alcohol-related content in commercials viewed during football games and the number of DUIs on certain days in Miami-Dade County. The method of combining content analysis of commercials with the compiling of DUIs on certain days over a period of years in Miami-Dade County and then determining correlation is stated around like the 5-minute to 6-minute mark, and the student presented their argument or conclusion at the 10-minute mark that there indeed was a positive correlation between the amount of alcohol-related content in commercials and the increased number of DUIs on certain days in Miami-Dade County. So, the focus of row 1 is the actual design of the student's research project and the culminating conclusion. To be thorough, and you may want to mark this down on your rubric, I have not come across any student samples that earn a 0 for this row of the rubric. Low responses are also not easy to find. I haven't found one. The student must at least state their research question or method or conclusion, which means they must really try hard to not state the other two in order to not move over into the medium column, and I just haven't seen that yet in a student sample. Medium responses, again, are hard to find. Again, the student must at the very least state their research question. That is a must. And then they must state either their method or final conclusion, and all of the samples I've found, students at least do that. High responses are the norm. Students do not find it difficult to state their research question, method, and final conclusion. Now that we are done with what could be called the easiest of the 7 rows of the presentation oral defense rubric, let's move on to row 2.